As I was dismantling an old bathtub on my property, something tumbled out, concealed within plastic. It was cash, a rudimentary mobile device I'd never encountered, and a folded document bearing my own name. I'm 62 years old, and I've shared my life with the same woman for 19 years. Within the span of 10 seconds, I grasped the devastating truth. She had been orchestrating a plan to divest me of everything. My name is Walter Hayes, and I reside in a tranquil suburban area of Phoenix, Arizona. What I'm about to recount began, quite innocently, as a small gesture of affection for my wife. A brand new bathtub, intended to replace the old one she'd frequently lamented. That was the extent of my intentions. I had absolutely no inkling that this bathtub had been concealing something for months, perhaps even longer. For me, that turning point occurred precisely at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in July. I didn't immediately retrieve the package. I simply stood there on my driveway, gazing at the fractured tub as if it had divulged a secret from within. After 19 years in a home, one assumes an intimate familiarity with every floorboard, every stubborn drawer, every wall that groans when the air conditioning system activates in the dead of night. This bathtub, however, had occupied my master bathroom for longer than my marriage. It was a cream-colored fixture, its edges chipped, bearing a faint rust stain that defied every attempt at bleach. Karen had occasionally brought it up, mentioning how it detracted from the bathroom's overall aesthetic and how its presence made her feel older. Hence, my decision to surprise her. That was the sole purpose of this endeavor. A surprise. Karen had departed for San Diego 3 days prior, attending a corporate training session. Her profession involved claims processing for a regional insurance company, a role demanding constant attention to numbers, spreadsheets, and subrogation files, work where even the slightest punctuation error carries weight. She had been under considerable stress for months, often returning home late, her phone habitually placed face down on the kitchen counter. My thought was that upon her return, it would be a welcome relief for at least one aspect of her life to feel simpler. I'm not the sort of man who purchases flowers on a whim. I've never been. My way of expressing affection lies in mending things. A leaky faucet, a malfunctioning garbage disposal, a water heater on the brink of failure. These are the matters I address. To that end, I drove my truck to the hardware store on Camelback. I selected a pristine white soaking tub and dedicated the morning to turning off water valves and wrestling with nuts that hadn't been disturbed since the late 1990s. The task took longer than anticipated. My lower back began to ache by 11 o'clock. By the time I managed to free the old tub, I should have sought assistance. I should have called my neighbor, Mr. Ramirez, who lives 2 houses down. He would have readily offered his help. However, I elected not to, a decision for which I bear the responsibility. I maneuvered it slowly through the hallway, exercising extreme caution to avoid scuffing the baseboards, then out through the carport and onto the driveway. I recall adjusting my grip, thinking I was merely one step away from completion, and then it slipped. It struck the hot asphalt with a jarring, flat impact that reverberated off the garage door. The entire side of the tub split open, resembling a cracked peanut shell, a jagged, unsightly fracture that elicited a visceral reaction. Immediately following that sound came a rustle, the soft crinkle of plastic against porcelain. Something had dislodged itself from a hollow cavity within the tub's lip. At first, I conjectured it was insulation or perhaps some construction debris left over from the house's original construction in the 1980s. Yet the more I observed, the more incongruous it felt. It was too tightly bound, nestled too deeply, deliberately placed. I set the hammer down on the concrete and crouched, my knees emitting their usual popping sounds. A faint odor emanated from it, reminiscent of aged paper or the interior of a safe deposit box. If you've ever opened a wallet that has been stored away for 10 years, you'll understand precisely what I mean. I picked up the package. It possessed more weight than its appearance suggested. The plastic crinkled in my grasp as I carefully peeled back its layers. Within, I discovered a smaller, zippered pouch, black in color, the kind of inexpensive nylon bag one might impulsively grab from a drugstore display. It was at this juncture that my chest tightened, for this was clearly not discarded detritus. It was intentionally concealed. With deliberate slowness, I unzipped it, and the first thing that came into view was money. Stacks of cash, not secured by bank bands, but simply held together by rubber bands. Predominantly in $100 denominations, perhaps amounting to $7,000 or $8,000. I didn't conduct an exact count at that moment. It wasn't necessary. Beneath the money lay a phone, a basic flip model devoid of any case or distinguishing marks, the sort of device purchased with cash at a service station and never registered. And beneath the phone, a single sheet of standard printer paper, folded, bearing typed text, not handwriting. The heading at the very top of the page consisted of a single word, timeline. I sank back onto my heels right there on the driveway, the scorching concrete seeping through my jeans. My hands felt unnaturally cold. In Phoenix in July, my hands felt cold. Now, a part of me wanted to discard everything into the nearest trash can and feign ignorance. Because a part of you, before your rational mind can fully comprehend, already senses danger. However, Walter, to his credit, chose the more arduous path. He continued reading. Listed down the left side of the page were dates. Recent dates, not from years past, but from weeks and days ago. Adjacent to each date were brief, concise notations. Re-engage after argument. Push refinance angle again. Maintain supportive demeanor. I reread that last directive 3 times. Maintain supportive demeanor. Further down the list, transfer funds post-paperwork clearance. Confirm separate account activation. Confirm Walter's signature on package. And at the very bottom, 2 words, final step. Nothing more. That was it. A peculiar sensation settled within my chest. Not an acute pain, but a palpable heaviness, akin to heavy furniture being moved into a room I had no desire to furnish. The dates corresponded. They aligned perfectly with conversations I vaguely recalled. Karen, seated across the kitchen table approximately 6 weeks prior, sliding a folder towards me, discussing retirement plans, emphasizing the need for prudent and proactive financial management to secure favorable rates before they inevitably rose again. I could visualize her now, in my memory, her hand resting gently on mine across the placemats. That subtle touch she always employed when she wanted my undivided attention. "This is for us, Walt," she had said. "We need a plan." And I had complied, because 19 years of shared life fosters a certain level of trust. You cease to scrutinize the person across the table. You simply believe. I glanced back down at the timeline, and then it struck me with full force. This wasn't a mere suggestion. It was a meticulously crafted script, a sequence of actions, a phased operation. I remained seated in that driveway long enough for the shadow of the carport to inch across the fractured tub, gradually engulfing the damaged edge in shade while the rest remained bathed in the intense sun. Eventually, I retrieved the burner phone and pressed the power button. It activated. No PIN, no fingerprint authentication, nothing. That, perhaps, was the most disturbing aspect, as it implied that whoever had concealed this package had never anticipated its discovery by anyone else. Never. I didn't delve into its contents immediately. I wasn't prepared. I simply sat on the broken edge of that tub, my elbows resting on my knees, staring at the seam where the porcelain had fractured, contemplating the countless nights Karen had brushed her teeth in that bathroom. The numerous mornings we had stood before the same mirror, sharing a silent understanding as 2 individuals who knew each other intimately. And all the while, this had been hidden just 6 inches away. I refolded the paper, carefully reinserted everything into the pouch, and placed it beside me. I then stared blankly at the concrete for what felt like an hour. The thought that repeatedly surfaced wasn't why. Not yet. It was a far simpler, more unsettling realization. This wasn't a relic of the past. It was something actively in motion. I didn't revisit the phone until the sun began its descent behind the Estrella Mountains. I brought everything inside first. One doesn't linger in a Phoenix driveway after dark with a wad of cash on one's lap. While the locals are generally amiable, they are observant. I placed the pouch on the kitchen island and simply stood over it, almost as if expecting an apology. It offered none, so I prepared coffee. Black, as I've habitually consumed it for 40 years. My hands remained steady during the preparation. That fact surprised me. I believe the ingrained routine served as my anchor. You boil water. You measure grounds. You pull. You don't unravel. Then I sat at the breakfast bar, drew the burner phone closer, and powered it on once more. A plain home screen, generic icons, messaging, call logs. That was the extent of its features. In a peculiar way, it was almost more unsettling this way. It might have been easier if there had been some bizarre application or password protection. This was simply unadorned. I tapped on messages. A single thread stood out, saved under the initials MR. I selected it. The most recent message had arrived that very morning. From MR, schedule's still good for Monday. From Karen, yes, he's been more relaxed since I got back. I'll finalize it then. I read that sentence twice. He was me. I scrolled upward. From MR, don't push too hard this weekend. Pacing is key. From Karen, I understand. 19 years. He trusts me implicitly. I leaned back on the stool. I could claim my heart was pounding, but it wasn't. The opposite occurred. Everything slowed. A profound silence descended, as if the world's volume had been significantly reduced. From Karen, if he hesitates on Monday, I'll bring up the retirement projection again. That always works. From MR, excellent. Maintain a supportive demeanor. Always supportive. That precise phrase again. Maintain a supportive demeanor. The exact wording from the printed timeline. Word for word. This was no mere coincidence. It was a coordinated effort. From MR, following the signature, funds will be transferred within 48 hours. The new account has already been verified. Verified. Already verified. I recall glancing at our joint financial statements over the past couple of months. I had noticed a few minor transfers that didn't quite add up, figures that seemed incongruous in the memo lines. I had dismissed them, assuming she had simply reorganized something. Now, I was no longer dismissing anything. I placed the phone down and rubbed both hands over my face. 19 years. One does not incinerate 19 years of a life over a few text messages. So, I stood up, walked to the hallway closet where we kept the filing cabinet, and pulled open the second drawer. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, old tax returns. I had meticulously organized everything myself a decade earlier, establishing my own systematic approach. And then I noticed it. A folder was missing. It wasn't an obvious void, merely something that would be evident to someone who had personally established the system. The refinance packet Karen had presented 3 weeks ago, the one I had briefly reviewed and then neatly placed behind the homeowner's policy, was gone. I closed the drawer slowly and silently, as if the cabinet possessed ears, and returned to the kitchen, picking up the burner phone once more. I scrolled further back through the older messages. From Karen, he asked again why now and not next year. From MR, what did you tell him? From Karen, rates. I told him about the rates. He nodded and stopped asking. Nodded and stopped asking. That was how she had characterized me to him. A man who acquiesces, a man who ceases to question. I contemplated this for a considerable duration. And here's the essence of what I want you to comprehend. I was not merely experiencing emotional distress. I was being assessed. He was being described in real time to an unknown party, framed as a problem requiring management. If you have ever been the subject of gossip, even in a minor capacity, you understand the hollowness it creates. Now, Magnify that by 19 years. Multiply that by the woman who shared your bed. I placed the phone down and gazed out the kitchen window. The desert sky was painted in that deep tangerine hue Phoenix displays before nightfall. Everything outside appeared normal. Within that small phone, however, nothing was as it seemed. I reached for my coffee. It had grown lukewarm. I drank it nonetheless. Then I retrieved my own smartphone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't dialed in perhaps 2 years, Frank Delgado. We had worked together in construction back in the 1990s when I was still involved in concrete pouring. He transitioned to the Phoenix Police Department, serving 22 years and retiring as a detective. A man of few words, he possessed an uncanny ability to read people. He answered on the third ring. "Walt, is everything all right?" I almost uttered a falsehood. The lie was readily available on my tongue, as effortless as breathing. Then, my gaze fell upon the burner phone on the counter. "No, Frank," I responded, "not entirely." A brief silence followed on his end, just long enough to indicate he was already shifting his focus. "Talk to me, brother." So, I recounted the events. Not the entire narrative, but enough to convey the gravity of the situation. The bathtub, the package, the phone, the timeline. He listened without interruption. As I read him the phrase, "maintain supportive demeanor," I heard him exhale slowly, the kind of exhalation that signifies a person piecing together previously recognized fragments. "Walt, listen to me," he said. "Are you certain about what you're reading?" "Word for word." "I'm holding it right now, Frank." Another pause, this one longer. "That's not random," he stated, "and it's not old. Someone wrote that recently. Someone with a specific objective. I already suspected as much. Hearing it confirmed by a 30-year veteran of law enforcement only amplified its weight. "What do you suspect it is?" I inquired. He took his time in responding. "Walt, at our age, people don't pursue extramarital affairs for physical intimacy anymore. They pursue them for the exit." I closed my eyes. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means someone is planning to leave you with as little as possible," he explained, "and they are exercising considerable patience in their execution. That patience is the element that concerns me." Now, I want to pause here because Frank uttered something during that conversation that I believe every single one of you should commit to memory. Affairs at the age of 60 are fundamentally different from those at 30. At 30, there's often an element of chaos. At 60, it transforms into meticulous accounting. Frank advised me to take no immediate action. "Not yet. Do not confront her," he cautioned. "Do not alter your behavior. Do not even exhibit a subtle change in your demeanor at dinner. If you confront her now, all that evidence will vanish with her in her handbag. The phone will disappear. The documentation will be gone. You will appear as a paranoid old man. So, what course of action should I pursue? Observe, document, and engage a lawyer. A competent one, not someone recommended by a friend, but a genuine divorce attorney specializing in financial fraud. I know such an individual. Susan Keller. Her office is downtown. I will send you her contact information via text." We concluded our conversation, and the house subsequently felt altered. Not haunted, but changed, as if the temperature had inexplicably dropped by 2 degrees, and I was the sole individual cognizant of this shift. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the same bed where I had slept for 19 years, listening to the desert wind buffet against the bedroom window. Around 3 in the morning, I arose and picked up the burner phone again and began searching for patterns. Not just words this time, but timing. There were brief calls between them, lasting 2 to 3 minutes, interspersed over weeks. None occurred at midnight or during suspicious hours. They took place during lunchtime, late afternoon, and immediately after work. These were conventional intervals, and that fact conveyed everything to me. Because conventional intervals suggest they were not engaging in clandestine emotional exchanges, they were actively operating. I proceeded to my laptop and entered the contact name. "Mr." provided no useful information, but the messages mentioned the firm twice in Dallas. Consequently, I initiated a search for financial consultant Dallas fiduciary. After approximately 20 minutes of browsing, I located him. Michael Reeves, an independent advisor, appearing to be in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of stock photograph smile that suggests a sales pitch for annuities aimed at retirees. An older article from a Dallas newspaper detailed a former client's complaint regarding unauthorized portfolio reallocation. There are no criminal charges filed, no convictions, merely unanswered questions. Naturally, this information fit a little too perfectly. I closed the laptop, sat there in the darkness, and pondered the nature of a man who would conceal assets within a bathtub and the woman who would reside above it for years. I contacted Frank again at sunrise, providing him with a name. He grew silent, the kind of silence that suggests he was making notes. Reeves, he stated. I've encountered that name through old contacts. He's not a criminal. He's something far worse. He's a system architect. He knows precisely where the boundary lies, and he never quite transgresses it. He's involved with my wife. A prolonged pause. Walt, this isn't a simple affair. You comprehend that, do you not? I'm beginning to. This is an asset transfer disguised as a marital separation. You initiate a refinance. You extract equity from the property. Those funds are channeled into an account under her control, with him serving as the designated advisor. By the time the probate process concludes years from now, you will be reduced to a mere tenant in your own retirement. What should I do? You contact Susan Keller this morning. Do not delay. So I did. Later that morning, I drove to our credit union on Thomas Road. I made no scene, demanded nothing. I simply inquired, in a casual manner, about any pending applications pertaining to the house. The teller, a pleasant young woman, began to respond, then paused, smiled, and stated that both individuals would need to be present. That hesitation provided the answer. I drove home and proceeded directly to Karen's closet. I wasn't searching for discarded laundry receipts. I was conducting a verification. Her clothing was present, her footwear, her jewelry box on the dresser. I opened it. The top tray contained its usual assortment. The lower compartment, however, was empty. There had been an item there, a small velvet pouch I had gifted her on our 10th anniversary. I closed the box, sat on the edge of our bed, and looked at the framed photograph on her nightstand. It depicted the two of us at the Hoover Dam, perhaps 12 years ago. Wind tousled her hair, and my arm was draped around her shoulder. We appeared resolute, genuine. I turned the picture frame face down and spoke aloud to the empty room. Who are you? My tone was not one of anger, but genuine inquiry, because the woman depicted in those messages bore no resemblance to the woman in that photograph. Or perhaps she was, and I had simply spent 19 years failing to truly see her. Now, observe the uppermost portion of that printed document, directly above the listed dates. There was a solitary, minuscule inscription in a diminished typeface that I nearly overlooked. Re-engage prior contact. Re-engage. That particular directive struck me with considerable force, as the act of re-engaging implies a pre-existing connection. It signifies a shared past, a history. It suggests that whatever situation transpired had been temporarily suspended, not newly formed. I contacted Frank. Frank, they were acquainted previously. The directive explicitly states re-engage. A prolonged exhalation came from his end of the line. Then, this is not treachery, Walt. This is a reclamation. She did not stumble into a situation. She deliberately returned to it. I will not be confronting her, I stated. Excellent. Allow her to return to Phoenix. Permit her to enter Monday's conference, assuming she holds all the advantages. You will let the situation unfold naturally. Karen returned to Sky Harbor that particular Thursday afternoon. I was positioned at the kitchen counter when I registered the sound of the rental vehicle arriving in the driveway. The identical, brief application of the brakes, a habit she has maintained for 19 years. Certain ingrained behaviors persist, even when individuals deceive. I had meticulously concealed everything: the discreet pouch, the disposable communication device, the detailed timeline, and a compiled dossier of evidence that I had been diligently assembling with Susan Keller throughout the preceding week. I had meticulously removed every single communication from that device, documented it with photographs, created backups, and ensured each was time-stamped. Certified copies were securely stored in a safety deposit box across town, registered under my sister's name. The new bathtub remained untouched in the garage. I had not proceeded with its installation. It felt incongruous to do so. The front door creaked open. "Walt, I'm in the kitchen, dear." She maneuvered her suitcase in behind her. Her hair was secured in that loose clasp she habitually employs on travel days. A lightweight cardigan. The same Karen. That was the most distressing aspect of the entire week. How remarkably identical she appeared to the woman I had once adored. She set her luggage down, approached me, bestowed a kiss upon my cheek in her customary manner, brief, familiar, almost reflexive. "How was the flight?" I inquired. "Exhausting," she replied, a smile gracing her lips. "San Diego is San Diego. Far too many concurrent sessions, insufficient amounts of coffee." I offered a nod. "That sounds about right." A brief silence ensued. Then her gaze drifted towards the hallway. "You haven't commenced work on the bathroom?" "I managed to remove the old one," I responded. "The new fixture is in the garage. I intended to handle it this weekend." For a fleeting instant, her shoulders visibly relaxed. A mere flicker. Had I not been observing intently, I would have entirely missed it. "No urgency," she commented. "No urgency whatsoever." We shared our evening meal that night, as if no alterations had occurred. Grilled chicken, a portion of rice, and a salad. The metallic clink of her fork against her plate. She would meticulously lift her glass of water, then carefully place it down. Her communication device lay face down on the table, its screen dark. She did not even acknowledge its presence. And I was acutely aware of which specific device was vibrating, because from within my pocket, the disposable unit I had been carrying all week buzzed in tandem. The identical moment, a dissimilar cadence. I maintained my composure. I reached for the salt shaker. Following our meal, she inquired if I had given further consideration to the refinancing. "I have," I confirmed. "I believe we should consult with an expert to thoroughly examine the financial figures." Her entire demeanor softened. She attempted to conceal it, but it was a subtle shift. "Actually," she said, "I have already reached out to a colleague from the San Diego conference. This is his profession. He specializes in assisting homeowners nearing retirement age. Michael Reeves. He will be arriving on Monday." "Monday is suitable," I responded. She scrutinized my countenance, searching for any hint of vulnerability, any trace of uncertainty, any hesitation. I offered none. "Merely a discussion, correct?" she queried. "Yes," I affirmed. "Merely a discussion." A smile appeared on her face, and for a fleeting moment, it almost appeared genuine. After she retired for the evening, I sat in the darkened living room and placed a call to Susan Keller's mobile number. "We are prepared for Monday," I informed her. "Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed in this manner, Walter?" "I am certain." "Then I will be there. And Walt, adhere strictly to our agreed-upon script. Not a single word beyond that." "Understood." Monday morning arrived, and I awoke prior to the alarm. Karen remained asleep beside me. Her breathing was slow and steady, her body turned away. For considerable duration, I simply listened. 19 years of attuning to the identical person's breathing in the same bed. Whatever else might be true about her, that particular aspect had possessed genuine substance for a significant period. Or perhaps it had not. Perhaps I was the one imbuing meaning where only routine existed. Our conversation was sparse during the drive downtown. She checked her device on 2 separate occasions. The conference room at the credit union was modestly sized. Its walls were composed of glass on one side. A lengthy table was positioned in the center, accompanied by 4 chairs. Michael Reeves rose from his seat the instant we entered. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a crisp shirt, and offered a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He perfectly matched the stock photograph in the article. "Walter," he stated, "a genuine pleasure." I extended my hand. "Likewise." He then turned his attention to my wife. "Karen, it's good to see you again." Again, that was the operative word. I did not betray any reaction. We took our seats. He commenced his presentation without delay. His delivery was smooth and practiced. Figures began to materialize across the table. Loan-to-value percentages, equity extraction strategies, rate locks. Karen offered affirmative nods throughout, interjecting brief, supportive remarks at precisely the opportune moments. Exactly as scripted, he slid a folder across the table towards me. It was thick and substantial. "Just preliminary figures, Walt. No pressure today." I placed my hand flat on top of the folder. I did not open it. I reclined, took a deep breath, reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, and placed the disposable communication device on the table positioned between us. A profound stillness settled over the room. Not an absence of sound, but a palpable quiet. Karen's eyes lowered to the device, then ascended to meet mine. "Walt, what is that?" Her voice was remarkably even. I must credit her for that. I reached into my other pocket and laid the folded timeline next to the device. I smoothed it open with the side of my hand. And then I uttered the sentence I had meticulously rehearsed in front of the bathroom mirror for 4 consecutive mornings. "You forgot this in the bathtub, Karen." For a lengthy second, no movement occurred, and then I perceived it. Her countenance did not falter. It was calculating. Michael's gaze flicked momentarily between the device and the document. He understood. Of course, he understood. Karen slowly leaned back in her chair. "You went through my belongings." It was not posed as a question. "It fell out, Karen," I replied gently. When the tub malfunctioned, everything dislodged. A moment of silence followed. Michael cleared his throat. "I believe there might be some misunderstanding here." I interrupted him without raising my voice. "Mr. Reeves, the messages remain on the device. The dates align. The transfer instructions are consistent. The verified account number matches. We can continue this if you wish." Karen regarded me with a distinctly different expression then. It was as if she were truly seeing me for the first time in 19 years. "How much did you read?" "All of it." She exhaled, and to my surprise, she gave a single nod. It was the gesture of a woman concluding a significant chapter. "All right," she stated quietly. Michael shifted in his seat. "Karen, we should—" "It is concluded, Michael," she interjected, without even glancing at him. "He is already aware. Cease speaking." That was the most candid statement I had heard from her in months. I slid a second folder across the table. "This is the documented evidence," I explained. "Messages, dates, inquiries regarding bank accounts. Certified copies are stored remotely." Precisely as anticipated, the door opened. Susan Keller entered. She wore a black blazer and carried a briefcase. Her demeanor was as tranquil as a morning lake. "Mr. Reeves." "Mrs. Hayes." Michael's posture stiffened. Karen did not exhibit any surprise. She simply folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Reeves," Susan began evenly, "I would like to discuss attempted asset reallocation, undisclosed fiduciary communication with a married client, and the coordination of marital fraud across state lines. We can address this here, or we can proceed before a judge in Maricopa County. The choice is yours." Michael's composure fractured, much like the bathtub had upon my driveway. Not instantaneously, but a significant crack formed along a seam. He rose to his feet. "I believe this concludes our discussion." "That is your prerogative," Susan stated. "However, this conversation is not over. It is merely relocating." He exited the room. He simply abandoned her there. She did not even watch him depart. Her gaze remained fixed upon me. You orchestrated this. I slowly shook my head. No, got in. You did. I merely stopped sleeping through it. Something behind her eyes shifted. Whatever remained of the woman I had married, not the calculating individual. The woman. Perhaps a minuscule fragment of her was still present. What happens now? She inquired. Now, I replied, everything ceases. Every transfer, every signature, every step along that timeline. It all stops today. She offered a single nod, retrieved her purse, and departed the conference room without uttering another word. I did not follow her. There was no necessity. A few weeks later, the residence once again felt tranquil. However, it was a distinct form of quiet. More pristine, lighter. The new bathtub was finally installed. White, unadorned, nothing ostentatious. I stood in the doorway one morning, my coffee in hand, observing it, reflecting on how something so minor could unravel something so substantial.